Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Vicki Wilkins, Dean of the School of Public Affairs at American University. Thank you to our esteemed guests here with us in the room, and thanks to all of you joining us via live stream today. I am so honored to be here today to welcome you and to share the very exciting news and the milestone gift to establish the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics. We are so grateful to Jeff and Samara Sine for their generosity, vision, and their ongoing commitment to American University. At American University, we understand that good public policy is not achieved by dreaming alone, and progress will only come with inspiration, vision, and hard work, a lot of hard work. This institute is a place where American University's energy, motivation, and commitment to excellence will shine through. Now, to tell you more about the Institute, it is my pleasure to introduce the President of American University, Sylvia Burwell.
Thank you, Dean Wilkins, for that introduction, and also for your leadership and insight as we've worked to get this university-wide institute situated on our campus. So thank you, Dean Wilkins. I want to start by recognizing the two people who created the foundation of this institute. With this gift, which is a milestone gift for AU's journey toward the future, they're making an immediate and a lasting impact on American University and on important policy discussions across the nation and the world. So please join us in thanking Jeff and Samira Sine. I also want to thank our board chair, Jack Cassell, and all of the members of the Board of Trustees who join us today, including Jeff Sine, who is a member of our board, Pam Deese, Mark Duber, Mehdi Haravi, and Arthur Rothkopf. We're also joined by a member of the Sine Institute's Executive in Residence Advisory Board, and she is at American University, an executive residence, and a special member of our AU family, Anita McBride. Anita, thank you for joining us today. And finally, I want to recognize my predecessor and someone who put AU in the position where we could build on and take advantage. So Neil Kerwin, thank you for coming today, Neil. Teddy Roosevelt was the first American president to set foot on the American University campus. And while he did not make this memorable remark on our campus, welcome, Senator, come on up, have a seat. I think he would find it appropriate for today, the remark that he made. Welcome, Senator Corker. President Roosevelt once said that the greatest reward that life has to offer is the chance to work hard at work worth doing. And the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is all about the work that is worth doing. The interconnectedness of today's world would astound President Roosevelt, and it gives us the unprecedented opportunity to bring together leaders from different sectors and from different continents. It helps us unite top scholars and experts from different perspectives onto common ground in search of solutions. It helps us inspire and educate the next generation of leaders. To help us seize this opportunity, the Sine Institute will be guided by a bipartisan, cross-disciplinary advisory board with experts from national security and defense, executives from the business sector, experts in the executive branch, and leaders who have led in both the private and public sectors. The Institute will harness American University's location, our academic and research expertise. It will bring together leaders from different sectors with our scholars and our students to create collaboration and conversation that will contribute to policy making, scholarship, and creating the leaders of tomorrow. It's about who we are at American University. The Sine Institute builds on American University's core. More than half a century ago, another American president spoke at American University. Shortly after the world's two superpowers had come to the brink of nuclear war, a young President Kennedy observed on our Jacobs Field, Our problems are man-made. Therefore, they can be solved by man. American University is a place for problem solvers, a community of change makers, and a campus where no one is indifferent. And now, I'm thrilled to welcome to the stage two change makers. One who, as an alumnus, lives out our favorite saying, once an eagle, always an eagle. Please join me in welcoming our former chair of the Board of Trustees, current board member, and an accomplished entrepreneur, as well as a seasoned journalist and advocate for women and children, the two people who have made this institute possible. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff and Samira Sain.
Hi, everybody. We're so happy that we're here with our friends and colleagues today. I also wanted to recognize our children here, Shaylin, Rowan, and John. We left the youngest one at home. She's in second grade, so we couldn't interrupt her school day. AU has given me a lot. As Sylvia said, I'm an alum. I've been a board member for a long time. Seen three presidents, and we keep getting better. So we're very happy about the trajectory of the school and about the progress. But I just wanted to spend a minute talking about why this idea that Sylvia had resonated so deeply with me and Samira. And part of it is about the times we live in and the need I think we all feel for dialogue instead of people talking past each other. But part of it is also the fundamental roots of AU as a university and as an academy. One of my early influences as a very young man was another great university president, Father Theodore Hesburgh, Father Ted from Notre Dame, who many times I heard talk about the role of a university as a beacon for its values, a bridge, and a crossroads. And I'm going to read this part so I don't get it wrong. It's a crossroads where all the vital intellectual and moral currents of our time meet and are truthfully considered. So I do want to dedicate this institute to the proposition of open-mindedness and critical thinking in search of solutions to the most pressing issues facing us as citizens of this country and citizens of the world. Now, Father Ted, somewhat in his contrarian fashion, used to quote Bertrand Russell, famous atheist British philosopher, which I think showed his open-mindedness. To Bertrand Russell, open-mindedness is the virtue that prevents habit and desire from making us unwilling or unable to entertain the idea that earlier beliefs may have to be revised or abandoned. Its main value lies in challenging the fanaticism that comes from a conviction that our views are absolutely certain. So that's really, I think, what we need more of in this world, and what I think AU can play its role, given all the wonderful opportunity that we have from our location here and our incredible faculty and our incredible students, play our role in opening up that dialogue and helping find solutions. So I want to turn it over to Samira in a moment, but I would say that from my point of view, this will be an institute, and we are a university where all are welcome, provided they come with an open mind and a willingness to listen and learn, especially from those with whom we may disagree. Mm-hmm. A commitment to dialogue and understanding that may not seem mainstream at this moment, but is in fact an affirmation of the most important and enduring value that this university represents. Thank you.
I wasn't expecting to speak, so I'll just speak as Jeff's wife and as a parent, that I'm excited, first of all, for Jeff. I know it's a dream of his to have this happen, and he's such a proud member of American University. It's also great for my kids and all kids to have an institution like this where there's open-mindedness, and I think it's really important today to have moral leaders, and I know that Sylvia and this institute will create many of them for all of us to look up to. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff and Samira. I'm honored now to welcome our first guest of the Sign Institute and our first conversation that will be convened by the Sign Institute of Policy and Politics. Before he was a senator, chairing the Foreign Relations Committee and guiding American foreign policy at home and abroad, Bob Corker got his start. Actually, many years ago, I read an article picking up trash and bagging ice. This was from a long time ago. It was his first job at the age of 13 and a perfect illustration of someone who isn't afraid to do any and all tasks to get it done. And a church mission trip to Haiti was a part of the spark that ignited a life of public service in local, in state, and in federal government. A career that has led him to visit more than 70 countries as he helps guide American foreign policy and takes a front seat in negotiating and navigating some of our nation's most pivotal votes on our economic and our fiscal future. So this afternoon, I'm honored to welcome to the stage the former mayor of Chattanooga, a two-term United States senator from Tennessee, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and someone who I have had the opportunity to work with across the aisle on some of our nation's most pressing issues. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Senator Bob Corker. Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on what I am sure is a very busy day for you. I was going to say, and hopefully maybe even a relief from some of the other things. So wanted to actually start our conversation today at a place where you and I had an opportunity to spend some good time and get to know each other better. It was sometimes in Washington, D.C. referred to the conversations around the big deal. Yeah. And this was about the idea that we could come together across the aisle and work on fiscal responsibility in our nation, as well as the investments that would make our economy grow stronger and stronger, whether that's infrastructure or healthcare or defense. And so I wanted to start in that space and ask you, where do you think we are in terms of the nation's economic health? From our fiscal standing in terms of the budget and deficit and those types of topics to things that actually underpin the productivity of our economy. And if you had a magic wand, so where are we now? And if there was something that you would want us to fix immediately, what would that be?
So the economic piece and the fiscal piece are very different. And before I get into that, I just want to say I'm so happy for American that you're their person. And I enjoyed so much working with you. So economically, I think you'd have to say as a nation, we're in a strong position. We've been growing out of a crisis that began back in 2008. I think where we have to focus is on the bottom 60% of our country and how they are progressing. I think sometimes we only look at GDP growth at large. We look at where the markets are. But I think we probably haven't done a good job looking through the entire socioeconomic spectrum at how everyone is doing. And we've got to figure out a way, I think, to focus there because, let's face it, some of the lack of discourse we have today is generated because many people in our country really don't feel that they have ended up with a life that they expected to have 30 years ago or 40 years ago or 20 years ago. So again, overall, strong, but certainly a focus needs to be placed on people who just really haven't done as well and haven't kept up. Fiscally, we're in a worse place than when I got here. You and I have been through that multiple times. It's one of the reasons I ran for the Senate. One of the best votes I ever made was the Budget Control Act in 2011, and who would have thought that 6 senators, 3 on each side, and the same on the House side, couldn't have figured out a way to save such a paltry amount of money. So we ended up with a sequester. But it's then, we were looking at it today just in preparation for this, probably saved us about $1 trillion in spending, but done so in a really inartful way, right? You and I began working on, through a couple of iterations, President Obama showed, I thought, a little bit of leg on dealing with some of the mandatory spending issues. And we had some fairly productive conversations that ended up with no end. And I was, after the financial crisis in 2008 that I, for some reason, as a new senator ended up being very, very involved in, I actually thought we were going to move after solving that to the fiscal issue and was very optimistic about it. I'm now in a place where I feel like, unfortunately it's probably going to take a crisis for us to do that, and that makes my heart heavy, that somehow or another we cannot figure out a way to slow the growth on the mandatory side and to figure out a way on the revenue side to cause the two lines to cross. But that's where we are today.
So in terms of the question of when you said focusing on that 60%, what do you think are some of the policy things we need to be pursuing to do that?
Well, you and I were just, we spent, 3 or 4 days talking about this in Colorado, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, something like that. I don't think we really came up with anything that was particularly earth-shattering. I thought, there was a focus on what certain cities around our country are doing, or regions, and I think we probably should spend some time looking at what is happening there. As far as a national policy goes, Sylvia, I'm not sure. I mean, again, we talked about a lot of things there. We talked about infrastructure. We talked a lot about, preparing people for careers in ways that weren't necessarily going to American University, and all those things certainly are important. But I don't think that today I could lay out, but it's an area where I plan to focus time on as I move ahead and away from the Senate.
Coming back to the fiscal issue, which both of us care deeply about, having worked on balanced budgets when I was at OMB the first time, something I care deeply about. I hear you on the point of a crisis, but if we weren't going to use the crisis approach, are there steps that you think that we could take to get both sides to the table to have the real conversation about how do we do what you articulated is at the core of the issue, which is that fiscal responsibility that is probably focused on issues of mandatory spending, as well as thinking through the revenue side, and it's going to be about both pieces. We know that, and we know that's where the solution space is, and how do we think about getting there?
So, an easy place to begin and a confidence builder would be with Social Security, right? I mean, it's just math. It's unlike Medicare, where there's so many other factors that come in. I mean, with Social Security, it's just a mathematical equation that your two sons sitting behind you could actually solve for us if they would. Meaning it only takes that amount of intellect to do so, and not that your intellect is low, of course. that amount of maturity.
Training in math.
So, I mean, look at it. Back in 1983, when the first deal was made, we basically had revenues coming in on 90% of the wages that were earned, and now that number's dropped down to 82 or 83%. So obviously, here I am as a Republican saying that we probably ought to be collecting revenues on at least 90% of the wages. I mean, that's kind of been the norm as it relates to Social Security. When Social Security was created, people were living to be 65 years old, and it kicked in at 65. And, you can make a lot of money with something that worked like that, right? You're going to start paying benefits the day people pass away. So obviously as time has gone on, people live longer, and so just a slow moving ahead. I think at one point we had a proposal a couple of years ago where by the year 2050 we were going to move up 1 year. 1 year. So you're just talking about a week or so each year, a couple of weeks each year. So obviously moving that up, probably for people like me who had good fortune in life, are benefactors of this great institute. I'm sorry, maybe mine shouldn't grow as rapidly, if at all, and possibly and probably those who are at the lower income spectrum, theirs should grow much more rapidly. So, and then I think using change CPI as a growth factor versus. So if you did those four things, Social Security would be solved, I mean, who would be offended at that? I will say I proposed that at a meeting once. I went around and did 66 town hall meetings talking about this. And I saw the veins on an elderly person's neck started popping out when I started talking about this. And I looked at him. I always like to call on the most antagonistic person first. And he, so, you know, he said, "I cannot believe you were talking about moving the age up on Social Security. You look like he was about 76. And I said, "Well, sir, no offense, but I don't believe this will ever affect you." Because, I mean, if you look at, so we can do small things that could solve the Social Security issue, and that would be a confidence builder, wouldn't it?
And as you think about the way to get that done, do you think it's going to have to be done outside of the regular committee processes? Is it, do we do better with gangs, you know, of X or Y? Do we do better? Should we use the committee process? What's the, I think that's the substance, and so getting, you know, as one thinks about substantive approaches and having the conversation around that, how should we do it?
Gangs just have not, gangs are not good for your health. I've been on a few of those, and they just don't work, and they end up, they just don't work. I think regular order is the way we do things the most appropriately. I know that we've actually moved, in spite of what people may think about Congress and the Senate today, we've actually moved far more fully to regular order than we've been in years. And that's the way to do it. I had a Democratic partner willing to announce what I just said, and we were going to, in the Senate, a great guy, is a centrist kind of person, but it was leading up right before the presidential race, and he just apparently, now you know it's a male, he just apparently, you know, felt too pressured, unbelievably. And as we saw in the campaign, Sylvia, both of the presidential candidates in 2016 did not want to touch it, right? Didn't want to touch that, did not want to touch Medicare. And that's what makes me feel, unfortunately, we may have to move, and this, again, to a crisis situation, but doing it through regular order. And unfortunately, as you know, or fortunately, things only happen like this under divided government because no party wants to own changing Social Security or changing Medicare. And unfortunately, the best opportunity was when you were head of OMB, and that time has passed. So hopefully another time will happen.
Well, moving to another issue where an issue that, as you said, candidates wanted to avoid the issue, and this is one where I think it would be fair to say in 2016, candidates were probably on one side of this issue. Both candidates were on one side of this issue, and probably you and I were on the other side of that issue, and that's trade. And what are your concerns about the current trade course for the U.S., and what do you think right now we should be doing differently in the place that we're now in? You and I probably think that some other steps before could have been taken differently too, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, both candidates ran against TPP, which was a shame. And now here we are, not only with that well, it actually occurred, it just occurred without us.
Without us.
And then the transatlantic was right behind that, where we could be working through all of these issues. So what's happening right now is an abuse of authority. We're using, you know, the 232 section of the Trade Act is being used. National security is being claimed to put steel and aluminum tariffs on our friends, both Canada and Mexico, and our European friends. That's an absolute abuse of authority. It was never intended for that. So that, number one, is just wrong. Okay, it's wrong for our nation. But number two, the policy is ridiculous. I mean, we have groups of people who go over to the White House, groups of senators to talk to, and they all, you know, I don't do that anymore because I've just found it not to be useful. But they come back and say, these guys have no plan. I mean, they're just making it up as they go along. I've known that from day one. And so we have just this thing where we do have a common problem with China, where they're absolutely stealing our intellectual property and forcing companies who do business there to transfer it. They first of all take it from companies here, we know that, but then they also so we should be working collectively to answer what we should be doing. with our European friends, okay, I mean, you look at the two of us combined, we make China look like nothing. I mean, it's a huge amount of power. And we should be working with them, not against them, to put pressure on China to change their behavior. And instead, we're infuriating them. I had a European country in today and a company here in the U.S. in today over what this tariff policy is doing to them. And as we know, it's making Americans pay more. It's a tax on Americans. It's not a tax on them. So we're separating our friends instead of consolidating our friends to focus on the problem. And in the process, we're hurting American consumers, we're hurting businesses, and we're also abusing an authority that was never intended to be this way. But other than that, it's really a good idea.
One of the things to the point of listening and hearing, the fact that both presidential candidates were in a place that's different from where you and I are in terms of the agreement that we should have gone forward with, the agreements that, in terms of everything you said. What should we do in terms of listening? There was probably a reason, and this gets to how the broader American public thinks about these issues, or do you think that's not true? And if so, if it is true that part of it is that's a position, the position we hold isn't broadly supported, what do we need to do about that?
Well, I go back to the economic topic we were talking about. There are people, many people in our country that are not living the lives they thought they would be living, and they've done everything right. I mean, they've worked hard, they've raised their families, they've been part of their communities, and so that's real. A lot of times when political figures are running for office, instead of pointing out what we need to do constructively, we find a boogeyman, we find a straw man, we find something. And so let's face it, trade has become that. There's no question, on the other hand, NAFTA needed to be updated. We need to update. There's no question that the argument that's being made about Europe having benefited from post-World War II activities, and maybe it's time to update, that's all true. So let's work to resolve some of the things that need to be resolved. But I think when, the best way to, unfortunately, to win a political office, this needs to change, by the way, and hopefully your institute will help do this, but is by dividing people and polarizing people. We need to focus instead on unifying people, and a big part of it is to actually tell the truth and to try to share with people the benefits, but also
honest about the
be
downsides.
honest about the fact that some of these things do need to be changed and do need to be updated, but we don't need to blow the whole world up. We need to figure out a way to again, bring people together, which I know what this is about, to solve the problem. But there was a fear. Both political candidates felt, maybe they didn't know, but they felt the only way they could be elected was to blame it all on trade. And now there's even more work that's going to have to be done to try to overcome. Let's face it, I mean, trade has made America strong. We are the leader of the world. We can compete with people as long as it's done on a fair basis. And we should not be afraid of it. But we have now a large population of people, probably the majority of the people in our country, that fear it.
So at some point, it seems every generation, this sort of leads from what you just said, observes that the country is more divided, or that politics are more partisan than any other time in American history. If one goes back in history, you see that being said at various points in time. And how would you actually assess the current state? We started talking a little bit about that. The current state of civil discourse in America. How would you assess, are we worse? Why are we worse? And then the other question is, what can political leaders, the media, universities, and citizens do? We all, in order to fix this, I think we all have to have a role. And people have different roles in doing it if we want to work on it.
Yeah, well, let's just start at the individual level. We do have control over ourselves. And if we think civil discourse in our country is inappropriate, I mean, it begins in your family and with your neighbors and with folks you go to church or synagogue or wherever with. I mean, we all play a role in this. The social media piece is, Micah, our communications person, is leaning up against a wall back there, and she was saying the other day, if you read our feeds on social media, you know, if I went over Niagara Falls with 12 puppies and saved them from drowning, somebody would be going, what happened at 13th? You sorry, you know. I mean, it's just, it's an incredible, the social media piece has really changed the way people, I mean, they feel like they're not really talking to a person, right? And now it's come out, I mean, people verbally. I will say that, I'll have to say, people have treated me with incredible kindness. I have no complaints. They have been treated me with respect. Hopefully I've done the same with them. I really have not had a personal issue with it, but I used to watch, I stopped watching some of the debates that just take place publicly. And so, again, I think political leaders, they have a much bigger, far bigger platform, and I think conducting themselves civilly, and as was mentioned in some of the opening comments, being respectful of other people's views, and realizing that the way we solve problems is to listen to the other person's side, and you can always find almost always find some area of commonality to build upon.
I found that I used the ratio of one mouth and two ears, that there's a reason that God gave us that ratio in terms of, especially when working in this space. Is there a particular role that you would articulate for, say, universities in terms of contributing to this question of civil discourse, bringing the discussion back to policy and substance?
Yes, I mean, I think that, I know as mayor of a city, and a mid-sized city, you know, the university was something that was important to us there in Chattanooga. It can be a convener, it can be a neutral convener. It's typically a place, let's face it, where debates take place, right? And so, certainly, I mean, I think a university, you know, as was again mentioned, you want people with open minds, you want people to listen, and I think, you know, not being afraid to bring in controversial figures who may have a differing point of view than the bulk of the student campus, but today it's, you know, you've seen movements away from that, right? Where if you bring somebody in with honestly, I kind of enjoy listening to somebody that has a radically different point of view than myself. So yes, I think universities can play a big role.
So one of what we hope will be several strengths of the Institute as we get it up and running is its ability to inspire the next generation of American leaders. And we have some of our students here today. And what would you say to the students who are interested in the Institute, but more broadly, interested in being a part of the solution, whether that's the solution in terms of making policies that bring together folks, or the idea that it's about creating that civil discourse, building those muscles. As you said, it's about individuals. And so what would you tell our students? How can they make progress on whether it's the policy issues or the discourse student issues? We've got a number of the students here, and I think a number will be watching. So what would you tell our students?
So I found coming into the Senate that as a new person, that you could sit around for years and wait until seniority allows you to be heard, or you could master the policy. And if you really focus on just a few areas and you know more about something than anyone else, it's amazing how people will come to listen, and you will become listened to. So I found that in the Senate, and I think it's that way in life. I tell graduating students from universities, you know, to master something so that they really create independence, right? But in the policy arena specifically, I think it's that. It's not being, you know, 1,000 miles wide and an inch deep. It's being really deep on a topic, and if you can do that, people will listen.
Know your stuff. I think it is good counsel and applicable to this situation, but to many. As we are coming into a season and an important time in November, what do you think are the most important policy issues that will bring voters to the polls for the midterms in November?
Well, Those are two different things. I mean, I do think
There's hopefully a Venn diagram of.
Unfortunately, I agree with my friend Ben Sass. Both parties are pretty bankrupt. I'm sorry, and so I mean, is anybody really talking about these important issues that you just brought up? They're not even going to be discussed. I'll guarantee you that no candidate in any place in the well, maybe there's a few in really safe seats, okay? But in any real race, is anybody talking about the future of our country fiscally in a real way, in a real solving way? They may talk about government waste or they may talk about something else, but no. So the fact is that neither party is bringing to the conversation the big issues of the day, the fiscal issues, the fact that what technology is going to be doing to the workforce over the next decade. Is anybody really talking about that? We're creating. So those are the issues that we are hired to solve. America's role in the world. You think anybody's really talking about America's role in the world? I don't know. I don't think so. Probably. And are people, by the way, going to come to the polls over that issue? I don't know. I don't think so. Probably what's going to drive it is, the outcome of the Supreme Court situation soon. Do you not think that's going to drive it a whole lot more? And by the way, that's really become sort of a political partisan thing, isn't it? I mean, where you sit is where you stand. So unfortunately, probably what is going to drive people to the polls will be totally non-relevant to solving the big issues that our nation has to deal with. Now, tell me if you disagree.
There actually is one place where I would disagree. I'm afraid, and to your point of in the conversations that are the real dialogue, is recognizing where there's truth, even if you don't want to admit it. And I wouldn't want to say that about our country and our nation, but I think much of what you said is true. There's one place where I think there is an exception, and that's actually healthcare. And I think when we look at what has happened in the elections, the smaller election, some of the things that have happened up till now, and when we look at some of the conversations that are occurring in the country, healthcare is the one place where I would say that there is somewhat of an exception, not completely. And then the other part of it that I would say is part of the reason for that is, I believe, is that the substance of that one translates to the politics very quickly, because everyone in this room cares about your health, or your family's health, your children's health, your parents' health. Everybody in this room knows somebody who has had a pre-existing condition. And so because of its personal nature, it translates very quickly.
Yeah, now, I know you're running your own book when you say that.
Not anymore. Did I say higher education was the issue?
She is an expert in this area, and I love talking with her about this topic when she was heading up this area. I think you're right, but I think the debate will only be two sentences. He is going to take away your coverage on pre-existing conditions, and he is going to keep it. It's not going to be a deep debate about what really would be necessary to cause our nation not to be spending 18 or 19% of our GDP on health care. It'll be about that. He's bad, he's good, he's good, he's bad over the pre-existing issue. I don't think the debate will be much deeper than that. Me. So I'm interviewing you.
That is a part of what the conversation was about. I think that it's interesting. In that particular space, I actually think that part of what we need to do is drive it to the real conversation in health. And that conversation, to me, is about three fundamental things that we can all agree on: access, affordability, and quality. When we talk about healthcare, and it's similar to the new field I'm in, higher education. So I think the more we can drive the substantive conversation, the more we get to that. Because I think what you brought in, that the conversation will be limited to a quality and access point pre-ex covered, and in that way, with no focus on what is a very real issue for many Americans across the country in terms of the affordability, and getting to the real substance of, do you believe X or do you believe Y, instead of the individuals, in terms of what policies will achieve what things.
So just for what it's worth, that's great. We can talk about that. I don't think that's driving this election. Okay, I talked to Republican candidates who are running. I am not. I'm, retiring in 3.5 months from the Senate. Not retiring. But on the Republican side, it's how for President Trump are you? I mean, it's all about, are you enough for President Trump or not? That's 100% of the debate. And I would guess, actually, on the Democratic side, it's how against President Trump are you? And so really, this particular midterm election may be the most devoid of any real policy discussion of any that's happened in recent times. That's my sense of where things are, and I'd be glad to be corrected by some candidate who's out there laying out quality this and this, and of course how we get there is the debate, right? I mean, there's a huge, dichotomy in our country as to how you do so, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of policy issues discussed during the midterms.
Well, on that negative note, we'll go to a more positive one.
No, it's not a negative note. It's a truthful observation.
Oh, and it is. And
Yeah.
that's actually what
Yeah.
I believe we have to do, is have the real conversations. I'm not going to argue the point that I think, the distance. I think healthcare is the one spot, but I think there is a lot of the politics, and I think that what you described as a proxy for broader issues that occurred in the last election, and the question of what those issues really are in terms of why people affiliate with individual or tribe, or group, or however you want to think about it, that what is it that caused people to do that so much? And so how do we think about addressing that? But a topic for another conversation. Instead, we're going to talk about the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly. Another topic that is burning up the waves of what people are talking about.
Really? You are at a university, apparently, because it's not burning.
It is not a topic. It is not. I was joking. It is not a topic, but it gets to your point of the important substantive issues that are not being discussed. And when I described to people what you and I were going to do and talked about this conversation, telling people what I like to describe it as, this is the conversation that should be happening in Washington, D.C. And so that's why I wanted to bring in the UN, which is a very important meeting that is going on in terms of what's happening in the world. And one of the things I wanted to get your thoughts about is, what is the role of the United Nations here in 2018? And what do you think the U.S. should be trying to achieve in this current session of the United Nations General Assembly?
Well, look, I mean, the UN is the convener of a flawed convener. I think everyone on both sides of the aisle would agree. It's, but it's a convener, and this is, I know, a trite comment to make. It's been said many times, but if we didn't have the UN, we would try to create something like it, right? I mean, we all complain about the way it functions, but it is the convener, and I'm glad we're a part of it, and I'm glad it exists in New York on U.S. soil. We have tremendous issues that should be being discussed. We've got massive amounts of man-made famines, man-created famines around the world, more than at any time in our world's history. We have still non-state actors that are creating havoc. We have obviously the growth of state actors now beginning to have conflict, which we haven't had for some time, both with Russia's activities and Iran's activities and others. Some of them are beginning to be hopeful. I mean, North Korea, at least, there's some discussion taking place. I think we all acknowledge not much happened the first time, but I do think, having met with our envoy last week, I think we're beginning to see the potential. I think we all look at that with great caution, but the potential of something occurring. Look, we still have the threats of, you know, we need to continue to work on the nuclear issues. So there are numbers of very, very important issues, but we need to continue to be talking. I could go through another lady's over. The nice person over there is telling
me that we are going to now open the floor for questions, and Dean Wilkins will moderate questions from the floor. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we'll open it up. You have back here on the second row, or about 3 in. To your right there, Julie. Oh, she's getting a mic.
Thank you so much. I'm an AU parent. My son is a third-year student. Thank you so much, Senator Corker, for being here, and thank you so much, President Burwell, for this event. I have in keeping with your discussion about fiscal responsibility and the various ways in which we can address the needs of the bottom 60%, I have a question about our country addressing some specific policy solutions that are investments in our people. And one area is education. I would be interested in knowing whether there is receptivity in the Republican Party and among Democrats for supporting universal public university education to be a competition for institutions like American University, and whether that kind of an investment is a way to not only address the bottom 60%, but all of us. And I ask this question with regard to education because I was a personal beneficiary of this country investing in my education. And I find that I have family members in other countries who are benefiting much more than my current children with regard to their country's investment in their education. And I'm sorry if I'm going on a little bit long, but one example of how this impacts me directly is my eldest son is at the University of Toronto, Canada's #1 university, and I pay much less for him as a foreign student at the University of Toronto than I pay for my younger son to attend American University. And we pay for our son at University of Toronto about 8 times more than a Canadian national would pay to go to the University of Toronto. And that's their #1 university. They consider that their Harvard. I think there's something
Yeah, you got it.
there's something there that we should address. Okay?
So I, in our state of Tennessee, heavily controlled by Republicans, heavily. I mean, like super majorities and a Republican governor. We have, in essence, that. We have it. So I really do think that it is probably, and actually President Obama, who I work closely with, as you know, came down to our state and to see what we were doing there. And he wanted to nationalize it. And I loved what we were doing there, but I didn't want to nationalize it, okay? I just felt like we'd be so much better off if each state would emulate the things or, you know, use the characteristics that work for them, but to do the same kind of things we've done in our state, where truly, even if you're 45 years old and out of work or changing or want to be, you can still go back in Tennessee and receive education for free. So it's not fully the way you just described. I was just in Sweden and Denmark and other places, and you're right. I mean, it is pretty amazing. And as a matter of fact, you know, I heard a person make an argument. This wasn't my argument, but on the NATO contributions, which we'd all like. I mean, I agree that we want everybody to participate fully. It's been an issue. It's been going on for decades. Republicans and Democrats alike have tried to make it happen. But the argument was, look, you know, you guys have free college here, and yet you're not contributing fully for defense. It's an interesting point. But I would go back and say, I would love to see every state be innovative in such a way that what you're saying would mostly be the case, if not fully.
Next question.
Hi, Shira Stein with Bloomberg Law, and I'm an AU alumna. I have seen that healthcare policy is both one of the most polarizing issues in our country, but it's also one of the places where Congress has actually been able to come together with some bipartisan deals this week. The House is expected to vote on the opioids package. So how can those kind of compromises lead to compromises in other areas where there is a lot of conflict still, especially in healthcare policy?
Well, I mean, the opioid bill is a good bill. It's not like a world changer, okay? And so usually when bills pass with overwhelming support like that, they're good, but not hugely transformative. But it's good. And go ahead, huh?
MACRA, there's an example of a big one.
Which one?
MACRA, closing the SGR. This is the doctor payment issue that you
Yeah.
all did. There's
Yeah.
a big one. That was a big one.
Yeah. So there, you know, there was the Murray-Alexander thing came really close. That would have been a great confidence builder and would have really affected people's premiums around the country. But unfortunately, as happens so often, the abortion issue came into play. Sometimes it seems like it comes into play purposely to blow things up. But I think there are numbers of micro issues like Sylvia's referring to.
One last question, right back here.
Is the 230 vote an actual vote where they need me?
Okay, you need to go.
Hi, David Barker. I'm the director of the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies at AU. What do you think the future of your party looks like? And I don't mean next year, but 20 years. And if somebody like Tim Kaine were here, I would ask him that on the Democratic side,
sure.
but he's not. So, yeah.
Sure. He'd be a good one to ask. I enjoy working with him. He's a very smart and thoughtful person. So here's what I hope it looks like. I am a Republican because I believe that America is a force for good in the world and that our citizens are better off when America is leading the world. So I'd begin there, that would be the position of the Republican Party. Secondly, that these fiscal issues that we are talking about matter and that we need to solve them. And every year that goes by with us not dealing with those, we get weaker. Thirdly, that our nation can compete with any other nation in the world and that trade has made us stronger. And we we need to make sure it's fair, and we don't want to disadvantage American workers unnecessarily. But we should realize we can compete, we can innovate, we need to lead. And by the way, more people have been lifted out of poverty with these types of policies than any other. And then fourthly, that institutions of government make mistakes, and we should strengthen the institutions of government, not tear them down for political purposes. I've been in Venezuela recently, and if you want to see what that looks like, it's very ugly when you tear down the institutions of government. And then I would just add a fifth. Look, I think we've got to realize that appropriate and legal immigration has made our country strong too. So that to me is where we need to be as a Republican Party. That's where I happen to be today. Maybe I'm an old timer. I hope not. And I think that I actually think we're going to return to that more quickly than you think. And with that, Sylvia, I don't
Yes.
normally, I'm a short timer, and I actually don't mind missing votes for an outstanding audience like this, but this one apparently is one where they really need me. So thank y'all.
Thank you, Senator Corker and President Burwell.
Thank you, Senator.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank everybody for being here today. Thank you for joining us online via live stream. As you can see, this is the sort of exciting conversation we'll have as we build on the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics. And again, thank you to Samara and Jeff for sharing this vision with us and entrusting AU with this great way forward. So thank you, and thanks everyone for being here. Have a great day.